So, hello everyone. Excited to have a conversation today with two leaders in the post-secondary space. We have with us Dr. Sandy MacDonald from Holland College, as well as Dr. Lev Gonick from Arizona State University, and who's also doing some work with us on adaptive leadership. The conversation today is focused on something that I think is facing many organizations, but obviously is facing post-secondary institutions as well, dealing with a time of rapid change, AI, and other challenges. So we're going to get into a conversation about how to lead through some of these challenges and some of the adaptation that may be helpful at this time. So Sandy, I'm going to turn it to you first. From where you sit, what feels hardest right now in leading an institution at this time? We're talking about AI, technological change, but also some of the realities that are facing us in our local communities. So maybe if you could jump in there.
Okay, thanks, Mark. And I'll speak from an Atlantic Canada perspective. I think I can speak at least on the part of the colleges, perhaps not the universities, but quite similar. The biggest challenge we're facing now is not so much a technology challenge, it's a fiscal sustainability challenge. All four provinces in the region are running deficits, significant deficits. All have looked either at capping or cutting budgets for post-secondary education. So the fiscal sustainability piece is front and center on everyone's mind, and certainly ours is here as well. So the issue becomes, how do we keep doing the things that we've been doing with fewer dollars and fewer students? The core of this has been two things. Under the Canada's new immigration policies, our international student numbers have been cut dramatically. So we've lost 80% of our international students. New Brunswick Community College would lose about 80% of theirs. Some of the universities are at 40, 50%. And of course, means a significant loss of revenue. And it also means you can't offer as many programs to your local domestic students as you traditionally would have. And it's my opinion that with the demographic changes here in Atlantic Canada, with an aging population and a returning birth growth, that we probably would have had to make significant changes to the way we interact with one another, colleges and universities, probably 15 to 20 years ago, had we not had international students. Now that the international students are essentially cut in half to three quarters, we're now facing a significant challenge with the fiscal sustainability and not a real great history at collaboration between and among the groups. So when I look at what's right in front of us, is this fiscal sustainability caused by factors that have been building for a period of time, which then again hampers our ability to take full advantage of the AI movement, because we need money to bring in new programming, and that money's not there. So we'd be a microcosm in Atlantic Canada of the challenges that are being faced by the other colleges and universities.
Yeah, so Lev, I think you're hearing it's something that's not maybe uncommon, many organizations face, but there is kind of, I would argue, almost like a perfect storm at a time when we're also thinking about, rapid change in AI, how it could be changing potentially how organizations, as a post-secondary institution, as an organization, on the administrative side is being run, but also how we're teaching and also how we're preparing students for a future that is rapidly changing. And our leadership is facing these very real challenges that Sandy has just articulated. So sometimes that can crowd out other things that we should be thinking about. So where would you see this in context to maybe what you're seeing globally, what you've experienced in your background, and how should leaders in the Canadian post-secondary system who are facing these challenges, how should they be approaching this?
First, thanks, Mark, for having me. I've just returned from a week in Australia and the week before, actually, in Southern Europe. And the conversation that Sandy has just outlined is not only common in Australia and in Spain, but that, of course, across the United States as well. And it is a very interesting moment in the history and in the evolution of post-secondary education. It, of course, is highly variable depending on the historic circumstances. In the case of Atlantic Canada, obviously geographic and demographic as well, all sort of, as you were suggesting, a form of a perfect storm. From our vantage point here at ASU, at Arizona State University, we would start with a sort of a framing around mindset And I think what happens during crisis, if I can sort of describe as sort of in shorthand what Sandy's outlined here, a moment of significant complexity, is that most institutions and most leaders in most institutions shift to a survival mode, shift to a hunkering down, button down the hatch. Can we, sort of survive the moment? And at ASU for the last 24, now almost 25 years under the leadership of President Michael Crow, I think we start from a very different mindset. And that is what he calls, borrowing on what others in the leadership world have called anti-fragile. At the very moment when the economy is tanking, when there are massive shifts in federal policy, when there is dramatic changes in the technological tectonic plates of our society, it's at that very moment that organizations whose DNA is informed by commitment to being anti-fragile actually plan to not only, as it were, be resilient, but also to become better at the end of that cycle. So I'll give you sort of just one quick example here. In the United States, more so than in Canada, in 2008, 2009, we had as part of the global financial meltdown, we here in Arizona were effectively at ground zero with a complete collapse of the real estate market, significant collapse of our financial circumstances, and support for public education actually went from sort of modest to anemic because there was a 30% overnight effectively that took place. And at that very moment where most of our sister organizations, both here in Arizona and around this country, basically went into survival mode and sort of talked about our resilience to somehow work our way through it, ASU decided to take a leap. Again, as part of our DNA, this growth mindset that we have. And we helped to define a brand new market, which today feels like obvious, which was online learning. Now, I say obvious only because it's much more significant a marketplace. But back in those days, we went from a very, very nascent idea of online student learning. There was so much derision in the post-secondary education marketplace. This is, you're going to turn into diploma mills. You guys are absolutely, throwing in the towel. How can you call yourselves a research university? No sensible faculty member, with her or his PhD would ever come to teach in that kind of institution. And today, again, we caught a moment in which we were committed to this anti-fragile orientation. And we fast forward to the current moment. Again, we're happy to also sort of hear Sandy's take on this one. But we're at a very similar moment. And at ASU, at this very moment when there are, again, the forces of complexity and the forces of technological change are upon us around AI, we are once again leaning in a very significant way to redefine our financial future by trying to take greater ownership of it ourselves. The innovation commitment at ASU is one of the foundational pieces of it. Just when you feel like you're in the rockiest of waters, heading towards the shoreline, is at that very moment that we seek to kind of pull on our innovation experience. And here at ASU, a lot of that is about positioning ourselves vis-a-vis AI. As a new set of offerings, not trying to reinvent ourselves. We're in a very robust situation, but we are mindful that in order to work our way through the complexity, we shouldn't simply be predisposed to sort of doing what we've always done, just better. We have to absolutely think about the new innovation curve that is upon us. And, we are doing it at local scale, regional scale, national scale, and international scale, constantly trying, again, not huge ideas because like Sandy, we're one institution, or in Sandy's case, obviously representing Atlantic Canada, as a consortium of schools that are working here, but working to constantly launch new ideas and new opportunities to attract both students as well as partners, which is, I guess, hopefully we'll get another a couple minutes to talk about this, Mark, just how important an orientation to this moment is about not depending on just the usual ways of doing business. Partnership here at ASU has been part of our secret sauce. Innovation is a huge part of our secret sauce. We went from basically being 50% supported by taxpayers. Today, we are under 8% supported by taxpayers. One might have said that's a fiscal crisis. But in our case, again, today we are about a $6 billion operation. We get about $400 million from the taxpayers of Arizona. We've actually seen that a challenge as an opportunity to embrace our growth mindset and take responsibilities for a very ambitious set of academic programs, development programs, collaborative programs around the country and around the world.
Well, I'm hearing never let a good crisis go to waste. Sandy, you actually alluded to in your opening, had we not had the opportunity with the international students providing some fiscal benefits, we might have got to this point earlier. So what are your thoughts on what Lev's saying around, because I do really feel like one of the things, and it's not just in the post-secondary sector, that we need to be thinking about broadly in the Canadian context is the mindset that we find ourselves in, and how we need to find a way to change that mindset into more of a growth mindset, entrepreneurial mindset, etc. So how do you hear what Lev's saying, and how do we actually maybe think about doing that, or how do we start that conversation with other leaders?
Yeah, I'll put on my psychologist hat for a minute here, Mark. And I was laughing to myself as Lev was talking about anti-fragile and, people talking with derision about going online because, human beings, we like to talk about change and we're great with it as long as it doesn't affect us personally, as long as it affects someone else. And I always, the example I use is the weight loss industry. Losing weight is not easy, but it's pretty simple, right? But the weight loss industry exists because people don't want to change. And I want something that lets me do what I want and lose weight. Anyway, the reason I'm making that change to your point, when COVID came, we knew as a college and with our partners, we were going to have to do more work online. We had about 10% of our content online in 2020 or 2019. And so I had to developing a plan. I had to do that. I had to get my champions and move forward. COVID comes. The first thing we said, this is a great opportunity for us. We spent $2 million. This is a lot of money for a little school like us. And we put it right into our staff and training. And we even got our people who work in our registry office to take a training from a program in Florida. Didn't want to do it at first. And suddenly started seeing the impact. You see the behavioral change almost immediately ripple through the school. So 2 years later, we probably had 65 to 70% of our content online for the investment we made. But we knew this is an opportunity here, not to be overwhelmed by COVID. And I think to Lev's point, the idea on a much smaller scale, of course, was that we put the crisis to use. Now, I would never say that at the time outside the college because we were overwhelmed with vaccines and spacing and cleaning and all those types of things. But we used it to our advantage. And then we started getting some significant gains. And I think, Levin, in ASU's case, I was reading a while back that I think when you got your first MBA online that was certified right across the country, everybody kind of stood up and take notice of what ASU is doing. So I'm not surprised at the derision. People would say, well, we don't really want to do online work until they realize that's how we're going to reach our audience. So we'll move probably from having, I would say, 85% of our students face-to-face. In the future, within 5 years, half of our students will be working full-time and taking our programs full-time, just on PEI. And we wouldn't have the geographical challenges, Lev, that your students would have. I mean, because, most people on PEI live within an hour of the college. But what we do have is people who are working full-time and taking our programs. So to give one example, we realized during COVID that we need to keep our childcare centers open. So we had 1 2-year program with 36 students in it. Now we still have that program because some students want to take 2 years to take the program. We have twice as many students who are working full-time in the centers and taking the program and graduating through it and getting a salary increase for every level they go. So I guess I'm not surprised at the resistance, but same thing here. And we're in a similar situation with AI. I mean, people are fearful of the AI. I think it's actually fundamentally going to make us a much better, much efficient way of having our students gain content, because the control of the learning experience, what's taught, how it's taught, how to assess, will now switch from the instructor to the learner. And I think that can't help us be more effective at what we're doing. So we're gonna use this AI as an opportunity to leap ahead, as ASU did, in much the same way we did with COVID 4 years ago.
Yeah, so that's great. So Lev, when you hear that, what are some of the things you think about? Because obviously we've talked about this a lot, and I certainly believe we're in a very profound time of change. One of the things that in traveling across the country and globally, talking to leaders is really, I do think that there's a lack of true understanding how fast actually things are changing, and at least the potential of the technology to have impact in almost everything we do. When you're seeing it from a perspective of, post-secondary leaders, so now we've got the mindset, right, that we're going to take and seize this opportunity. What next do they have to start thinking about? What are some of the first things? And I know I've been very impressed with what ASU have done and where you are on the trajectory, and I think it's well understood globally, the leadership that ASU has taken on this. But where do you really start? It's not about just tool adoption. Like, how do you think about this from an organizational perspective, and how do you start, and where do you go? Kind of, how do you start that path?
Maybe just two things, Mark, to try to be responsive to that question. First is to actually understand where there is market. I guess I took that from Sandy's sort of first comment that the traditional markets are devolving for the colleges, and so again, at ASU, what we've done is approach the market with significant orientation to segmentation. We realize in the United States, there are just so many areas to get better at in terms of performance for universities. The better part of right now, one of every two Americans who starts college doesn't finish. 2 million Americans have some credit, no degree. We said, I mean, first of all, that is just an indictment of our sector. What can we do at ASU to create a proof point for how you support those kinds of learners? So again, now more than a dozen years ago, we partnered with Starbucks to create a program that has allowed Starbucks employees, baristas with at least 51% time in the company to actually come back to school through ASU in partnership with a degree completion program that Starbucks, as a benefit, offers to its employees. President Crow was just saying yesterday that this coming May we will have graduated our 20,000th Starbucks barista. We have 25,000 students currently enrolled along the way. And that was a market identification, not because it's only Starbucks. We're also doing it with Uber. We're doing it with Aramark. We've actually created a whole new company, a joint venture at ASU, noting that this is a market that, again, we should have, an orientation to trying to support that kind of work. And so there are now 50 different companies around the country who are actually taking advantage of the ASU degree completion offer. So that's just one example of like, where is their market? And when it comes to, again, I think the work around AI right now, I think it's just such a fantastic opportunity to understand that geography is much less of a barrier than any way that we'd ever thought of traditional learning that is out there. And as you just said, Sandy, I mean, online is like that's that's going to be one of the modes. It's probably not the mode, but it's going to be one of the modes of learning. How do you bring that together and basically make a run at? And again, we're working on it here at ASU as well. But how do we create opportunities for new kinds of learning to prepare students who work with us and could work with you as an Atlantic Canada initiative, but to focus in on preparing them for the AI economy, which is not in the future. It's here. It's just unevenly distributed. And if you want to create value or you want to create an opportunity, it's like, how do we attract rather than, as is almost always our instincts, how do we resist leaning into the AI opportunity? And then, again, I think in our view, there is just a huge opportunity. Part of the challenge, and Mark and I have discussed this in the past, is what is the sweet spot? Where do you see, mixed metaphors here because I'm talking to some Canadians, where's the puck going? Where's the puck going this way? And I do think that fundamentally we've been kind of breathless with all of the headlines that are coming out of the AI industry, which has got us actually with very cloudy vision right now about where this is going. And in my view, where this is going is that a great opportunity, again, I think for Canadians, because of, again, lots of different circumstances, actually to lean into the opportunity to understand the importance of what we might call kind of AI sovereignty or digital sovereignty, because all of the breathless headlines here are about basically us giving to the big machines everything about our intellectual property, all of our knowledge, all of our music, all of our libraries, and quote unquote, they're going to, give us magic back. Well, no, that's not the case at all. What has to happen now is we have to have a strategy that can be executed on that actually says, if you come spend time with us, and at ASU, we call this the agentic self, rather than, again, the idea that we'd be using AI or agentic AI. That is, say, instead of just relying on the machines, we're going to actually try to create an environment where when you come to ASU, you're going to experience a way in which you can actually learn how the technology works, but in the service of your own agency, your own abilities to own your own destiny. As whether you're a business student or an engineering student or a social worker or a humanities student, all of which is to say, like, we think this is not a kind of, it would be nice if, or certain kinds of subjects are kind of likely to be relevant to, like, no, AI is everything right now. So how do we, again, unlock human agency in this environment? And the great news is, as educators, like, that's the business we're in. We should be designing learning experiences. We should be curating the context for learning, and we should be helping students sense make. And that should happen more broadly than it is, rather than kind of going, well, that'll be for the next generation of leaders and students to figure out, or, this too shall pass, or whatever attitudes that we take, instead of leaning into it. And I think here at ASU, we're committed to piloting very quickly, very iteratively, agilely, seeing what works. Lots of stuff's not going to work, on this journey. And again, there's not a ton of risk capital here. This is not a case of, ASU's a $6 billion operation, therefore you guys have all the margin. That's not true at all. We're the second leanest public university in the entire country, essentially, in our peer group. So we run super lean, but this is, again, a combination of mindset and execution strategy.
So I think, Lev, when you're talking about the creating environment, that's what I mean by the power or the imbalance between the learner and the instructor is switched now with AI from one to the other. So the learner creates essentially his own learning environment. What's taught, how it's assessed, all moves from one to the other. So you're creating your own environment without any sacrificing of quality. So that to me, I guess the question I'd have, do you mind, Mark, if I ask a question here? Okay. The question I'd have
is this is the way he rolls, Sandy. He set it up.
I figured he would. So the when you talk about the 50% dropout rate, the group that we are most focused on in Atlantic Canada now, and it took some doing to get us this far, is we've got about 40% of the kids coming out of high school who cannot make a successful transition to post-secondary or the labor market, college, university, or apprenticeship. So for the longest time, we've ignored that. And that's maybe not a fair word, because that implies some sort of willfulness, but we hasn't paid attention to that group of people. And I'm looking to say, that's where we got to go. Why haven't the post-secondary institutions in the United States looked at that 50% dropout rate? What's getting in the way of them saying, well, Jesus, if ASU sees this, why can't we see this?
Well, I mean, again, I don't have anything kind of flattering to say about our sector this way. I think it's a combination of sort of an elitist orientation. After all, there are plenty of students who, quote unquote, are going to make it. And the reason that these other students don't make it is their fault. Rather than the reality being, of course, that it's all about, our arrogance. Again, I think that's institutionally speaking, and again, with lots of exceptions, but I think that's still very much the case. And I think that, again, ASU is modeling, and there are lots of other players who are now in this space, but modeling the idea that there have to be lots of different pathways into the post-secondary education environment. And if you're not prepared, we should make it possible for you to qualify to become prepared to enter into qualified to get in. And so those are all like commitments. And I love the idea that you're focusing in on helping transition, again, that significant percentage of the post high school community that should have choices. I mean, I think that this is all about sort of saying, in the end, that's all we can really do is hopefully help people understand that with the right opportunities, skills, socialization, interactions, exposure to the technology, our goal is to give you the opportunity to say, I have choices when I enter into a market or continuing my studies or whatever it is that is driving us. And I think in this AI moment, because it is more of a greenfield than we allow ourselves to generally see, this idea that there's such a wonderful opportunity in general in Canada, I think, because you are, unlike here where we have such massive industries, like the huge players consume huge amount of all of the technology work and all of the labor market. So in Canada, you just have a significant Marcus told me in the past, huge percentages, 75% plus in small and medium-sized businesses. In Atlantic Canada, having traveled there as a kid, I'm mindful that that's sort of by definition the neighborhoods and the communities and villages of Atlantic Canada. The great news is that there are just all kinds of ways of creating opportunities. There is land, there is water, there is tradition, there is heritage, and all of that is a chance to create, again, an AI enabled. So think of it this, my general way of thinking of this is X plus AI. Like if you want to sort of like, what is the opportunity here? It's like X plus AI. And if we can get into that mindset, then I think we unlock opportunity and value, as long as, again, we understand that at the same time we have to execute.
One of the big advantages, I think, in the United States is that the large corporations are willing to invest in their own workers, willing to partner with the SU, for example, Starbucks and Uber and those organizations. In Canada, it's much more likely, especially in this part of Canada, that the small and medium enterprise look to government for that sort of issue. So we, for example, have a research kitchen here, Canada Smartest Kitchen, where we work with small and medium enterprises as they create new innovative foodstuffs. And so part of it is to find government money to fund that research for the small and medium enterprise. There's not as receptive to the idea of putting their own money into it, because the fear in Atlantic Canada has always been, well, if I train Mark, he'll go work for the guy down the street. So I'm not going to train Mark. So that's a bit of a hurdle.
So Sandy, that's just hugely important, again, for us to at least put out on the table. Again, I think this is not just mindset. I think this kind of the design of the way in which public education in Canada, and by the way, in Australia last week, saw it over and over again. Financial or the fiscal challenges that you started with in our conversation today are ones where, because there has been so much dependence and the relationship, the sort of expectations of who you negotiate with is the state legislature, or in your case, the provincial government or the federal government that is in play here. I think the benefit of being out here in the wild west, southwest of the United States, in a very complicated environment here, is that we actually are we're publicly situated. We get almost no public support. We get no public investment, and so this is we don't call ourselves a public agency. And I think most universities and colleges in Canada think of themselves as public agencies.
Absolutely.
We think of ourselves as a public enterprise, where enterprise is the enterprising side of what we try to do, is that entrepreneurial piece of it. And I know it's not necessarily kind of in the DNA of a lot of Canadian leaders, especially in the post-secondary sector. But it is if there was ever a moment to sort of kind of go, right, disrupt or be disrupted, this has got to be the moment.
Well, there'd be many people from universities in Canada, not so much now, but go back even 7 years ago, would never use the word skills, because they would say, well, university, we're not in the labor market business. We're in the knowledge business. College is in the labor market business. But once government money started to flow for skills, suddenly my friends are university profs saying, yes, Sandy, we got to work on our skills. I said, what are you guys talking about? You've never heard you use that word in 20 years. So, but to your point, I think the when you've got social ills, let's say, I'll say a 40% or 50% dropout at universities, or 40% transition problem from high schools. We need to go where the problems are, I would say, and say, now, if you're looking for government money, they're saying, well, help us with this problem, as we should, because that's our bread and butter. And we've somehow, and I think the international students were contributing to this. I'm not blaming anybody here, but so we didn't have to pay attention to something we should have been paying attention to. So somebody else, well, nobody paid attention to it. It was like somebody opened up a restaurant and you specialize in this, and somebody steals your customers. Nobody stole our customers. We walked away from them, I think, to put it fairly. So I think to your point, you say, where are the market? Well, there's a market that we have. And again, I'm not using the word ignored here. It looks purposeful. Is that we've de-emphasized or walked away from, or whatever word we want to use. I think your first point there is well taken. We need to go back to where there is market, because there is market in our community, for no doubt in my mind.
Well, this is great. I think we could continue for another hour on this conversation with both of you, but I think we covered some really important things today.
Can I ask another question, Mark, before we cut out?
You sure can. We can keep going for a few more minutes.
Yeah, one of the things that I'm interested in as a leader, and especially in change, because I've been involved in a lot of change in this province and elsewhere. And, we just got a major project with the private sector funder that it's coming to fruition, and we're thrilled going at this 40%. I wonder if you could comment on, and you mentioned a little bit of it earlier, this idea about tolerating a little ambiguity as you're moving forward. Because when I'm leading and doing presentations, people say, well, what's going to happen, Sam? I say, well, I think this will happen. We hope this will happen, but it may not happen. What are your thoughts on that ability, that kind of ability to tolerate at least some ambiguity as you're moving these files forward?
My day job is I'm the chief information officer for this, very audacious and very ambitious, university here in Arizona State. And if I didn't embrace and at least wake up every morning thinking about how to thrive with ambiguity, we wouldn't get out of the starting gates as myself nor any of the team here. I think it's a fundamental skill set. I think leadership teams to have different kinds of qualities, complementary qualities. You need people who can give you the big picture strategy, folks who can execute on the operations, and then there's this very important tactical layer of leaders that we need. And I think that's where oftentimes you get this kind of interesting chemistry of how much ambiguity those tactical leaders can offer in the organization. And again, because I started by sharing the ASU online story. It's obvious, again, that we're the better part now of 15 years into our journey here, and when there's a market and it's worth so many trillions of dollars, it's like, well, at the time, like you thought that it was like, what's the surefire destination that we're going to hit on, and how do we get our share of the market? You helped to shape and establish the market. And again, I think that has to do with our ability to embrace ambiguity in the search for clarity, signal. And right now in the AI moment, there is a ton of noise. The important part for us in our sector is to stay focused on where we expect that there can be signal. I love the way, Sandy, you framed this idea of understanding, where there is need, and instead of walking away from it, lean into it creatively with partners. Again, this is not a chance in the world. Colleges, universities, or even sort of mega universities like ASU go at it alone. I'm here today at a national forum called the Business and Higher Education Forum. There are hundreds of companies and hundreds of universities here, and it's only by working together that we find a path into sort of this kind of, again, common future that we're trying to shape. And I wish you luck, and I'm looking forward to coming up to visit. I think Mark says that's in the cards sometime, maybe while it's July or August here, and it's something on the order of 43 or 44 degrees outside. I'll find a way to
Yeah,
walk along
but
the
don't come in
shoreline.
February either, Lev. No, don't come up here in February or January. It's not, as you would know, it's not very nice. July be perfect, August be perfect, yeah, and we'd love to have you.
It just struck me one thing, I guess, and then we'll start wrapping. But what we see in enterprise, and I think I've heard it reflected even in some of the conferences on AI, there is a tendency for certain units in an institution like general counsel or IT, which Lev is representing, to naturally say no instead of yes, but we have to do it this way, right? To secure our risk. So I do think there needs to be a leadership vision. We need to have a different mindset, and we need the right teams as well in the right roles to, again, take that risk, because the other option of staying the course right now actually has more risk than taking some
Absolutely.
educated changes. And I do see that as a big challenge, because I think, Lev, you're a unique leader in the space. That's why we certainly value your opinion and hearing from you today. And I think the leadership team, if you look at the story of ASU over the last couple of decades, has been incredible, and kind of you've shown a path and a way forward for many other institutions. So thank you for that. And Sandy, thank you for your time and thoughts today. Really appreciate it. I'm sure there'll be more conversations, but I think this is a really important conversation that, half hour can't do it justice to, but I think it's a good start to be thinking about mindsets. How do we create adaptive leaders, adaptive organizations, and create a workforce that's adaptive for a changing future as well?